Zippy Hotovely is the Israeli ambassador to the UK. She has spoken to Sky News and given one of the most chilling interviews I've ever seen.
What's the view on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza this morning?
There is no humanitarian crisis because...
There isn't?
There is no. Israel is in charge of the safety of the Israelis. Hamas is in charge of the safety of the Palestinians.
There is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and Hamas is responsible for the safety of Palestinians. Now, Israeli bombs have already killed almost 800 children in Gaza. Israel has shut off running water to 2 million people in Gaza. Israel has also shut off the electricity supply, meaning the desalination plants can't function, so there's no other way to get water in Gaza. Journalists, medics, and UN workers are being killed. Yet there's no humanitarian crisis. No humanitarian crisis. This is not a fringe pundit. This is the Israeli ambassador to the UK. This is the representative of the Israeli government to the UK who is saying there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's completely sick, and it actually gets worse.
We've been showing pictures this morning that would illustrate that there is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Are you a mother?
Yes.
What would you think if your children would have been executed in front of your eyes? Would you expect your government to think about those Nazis committing those crimes and to say, wait a second, first of all, we need to protect the enemy, and then to protect my children? Your children come as priority to your prime minister.
Does the Israeli ambassador not think that Palestinians also have children? Right? Are there not Palestinian mothers who care deeply about their kids? Or is Zippy Hotovely suggesting every man, woman, and child in Gaza is a Nazi? Because if she is, that's the language of genocide. No, when Vladimir Putin says that kind of thing, our whole media rightly says that's the language of genocide. When he says Ukrainians are Nazis, so they're fair game, we think that's the language of genocide, and the mainstream media thinks that's the language of genocide. When an Israeli ambassador says it, that's normal. That's normal. That's sickening. That's disgusting. Let's go to another moment in the interview.
Never in the past we had such a clear-cut war of good versus evil, of people that are slaughtering babies versus people that are protecting their children in a shelter. Everyone saw the Israeli parents protecting the children in the shelters, and everyone saw the horrific footages of those beheaded babies, this horrors that created by Hamas terrorists. So this is such a clear-cut war.
Now, we haven't all seen footage of babies being beheaded, right? No international media outlet has confirmed it happened. Now, massacres did happen. Obviously, massacres did happen. It's not a question, if no babies were beheaded, that means what Hamas did was fine. Absolutely not. But if you are the Israeli ambassador, right, then when you are going on the television, you should say stuff which is verified, which has evidence. You can't just go on there and say, everyone has seen this, when no one has seen this, right? Or maybe someone in the world has seen it, I don't know, but no international media has verified this, which means that I've got no reason to think it's true, right? It's also true, she says, Israeli mothers were protecting their babies in shelters. That was awful. These are awful things. I have every sympathy for Israeli mothers sheltering their kids in shelters. Does Zippy Hotovely not think Palestinian mothers also protect their babies when they are being attacked, right? It's not just Israelis protecting their babies. They're also Palestinians protecting their babies, right? They're less likely to have shelters, in fact. And they are being bombed by one of the most powerful militaries in the world, day after day after day after day. Again, remember, this isn't just a fringe pundit on right-wing TV. This is Israel's official representative to the UK. Now, I want to just show one more answer from Hotovely, as it really shows how the Western powers are implicated in Israel's callous attitude towards Palestinians in Gaza. She's asked about what peace might look like, and she says this.
The only solution that is at the moment at the table is the safety of the children of Israel. You don't speak about peace with Germany when the Germans are attacking all Western Europe. This is the reality we're in. Think about Churchill in his moment when all Europe surrounded and he had to stand still and to say, no, this is a pure evil. First of all, we need to defeat the pure evil. And then in the future, we need to speak about future peace. Chamberlain and Churchill were the two paths that Britain had during the Second World War. Everyone knows how Chamberlain's attempts for peace were failed, and sometimes you need just to fight evil. And I think this is the moment where we're fighting pure evil. And the Americans know this is why they're projecting so much support. And the British know this is why they're supporting us.
So 2 points I wanted to make here, right? So I think you will agree with me. That interview was sick, right? Someone saying that there is no humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Someone saying that if you're a mother, you must accept that we have to pound Gaza with 6,000 bombs over a 5-day period, which is what the Israelis have done, right? Completely ignoring the fact that there are also Palestinian mothers, there are also Palestinian children, basically saying that everyone in Gaza is a Nazi, right? These are incredibly extreme. This is genocidal language. And then she is saying at the end, and this is why the US and the UK are supporting us. This is why we're being backed so profoundly, so enthusiastically by the West. And that's kind of the one part of the interview where she wasn't lying, right? It is true that Israel are being backed by the West, that they're being backed by the United States, they're being backed by the UK. You've got this country where their official representative to the UK is speaking in genocidal language, lying outright, essentially, lying, especially when it comes to there not being any humanitarian crisis in Gaza. God, you have to be an idiot to not recognize that that's a complete lie. And she is saying, yes, and we have the backing of the US and the UK, and essentially that's why we feel so confident in this war of good versus evil. The second thing I wanted to mention is this World War II analogy, which keeps being put forward by representatives of Israel and sort of their supporters, which is to say, just as in the Second World War, you had to go into sort of a total war against the Nazis, we have to do that against Hamas. Now, she mentioned Dresden earlier in that interview, and it's been noted that actually people have now reassessed whether or not the flattening of Dresden was proportionate, given how many civilians it killed. Separate from that, this is not analogous to the Second World War. Hamas are not analogous to the Nazis. And I don't say that because of their ideology. I don't know enough about Hamas's ideology to sort of say whether or not it borders on Nazism. But what I do know is their power, their influence. Hamas is an organization in an open-air prison which has, it's got more military capabilities than we thought it did a couple of weeks ago, but it is not an existential threat to Israel. Israel is the most powerful military in the Middle East, right? There has been this tragedy which has impacted many, many Israelis, and perfectly understandably, Israelis and the Israeli government don't want this to happen again. But that doesn't make Hamas an existential threat to Israel, like Hitler and the Nazis were an existential threat to Europe. It's so clearly a misanalogy, and a misanalogy being used to say any means necessary we can use to destroy Hamas. Now, it's a bit similar to the language which was used by, some people who I think have made a call which is hard to justify when it comes to Hamas's actions, to say any means necessary. This is an occupied people resisting an occupier. Now, obviously, occupied people do have the right to resist an occupier, including by using arms. I would say that doesn't include massacring civilians at a music festival. Now, if you're on the side where you're more sympathetic to the idea of sort of Israel's security being the priority, yes, you might say Israel has a right now to take some military action against Gaza. I would say that's actually questionable because they are an occupying force. But if you were to take that position, I would hope you also take the position that they should follow the rules of law when they do it. Just as Hamas attacking civilians was a disaster, Israelis attacking civilians is also a disaster. But the Israelis don't want you to think that. And I mean, it seems like Western leaders don't really want you to think that either. They don't want the Israelis to think that either. Aaron, what did you make of that interview? As I say, it's not a fringe person, the official representative of Israel to the UK, saying that dangerous nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, on the World War II analogy, Michael, it's hugely interesting, isn't it? Because when, first of all, Chamberlain takes Britain into the Second World War, he leaves office in 1940, shortly before Dunkirk. He also remilitarized, he gets a very hard press, actually. He remilitarized Britain to a pretty extraordinary extent. He was the guy that signed off on Spitfires. So this idea that Chamberlain's a peacenik and Churchill was a wartime leader, I mean, we have that history because literally Churchill wrote it. And in terms of comparing Palestine, like you say, Michael, to the German war machine of the Second World War, probably the most impressive military ever. This is the Wehrmacht take over continental Europe in a matter of 18 months, even less than that. They rout the French army, at that point considered the world's most powerful. People don't really talk about this now. In 1940, the French army was considered the world's most powerful. They rout it in, I think, 6 to 7 weeks. So the idea that you're comparing, even Hamas, right? You don't need to talk about the Palestinian people, civilians, the people that are actually really suffering right now. Even Hamas. The idea that is somehow analogous to the Wehrmacht that is somehow analogous to one of the most powerful armies in the history of humankind is so stupid, it would only be uttered by a complete idiot, and it would only remain unchallenged on the British media. It is so stupid. It is so entirely stupid and so disproportionate, the actual reality of the situation. It's just a normal, healthy person would just dismiss it. This person's a charlatan. It's hyperbole. It's nonsense. But if it's BBC or Sky or LBC, it's a really interesting point. Very powerful analogy there to the Second World War. Not every conflict is the Second World War, but of all the conflicts that least resemble the Second World War, this is it. And actually, I want to say this as well for people from the left. They've compared this in terms of Israel-Palestine to British and India, or apartheid South Africa. Very different, because in apartheid South Africa, you have an overwhelming majority of people are black South Africans. Or in India, you have I think 300 million Indians in 1945, when it approximately takes independence, really around the time of the Second World War. 300 million Indians, and fundamentally, you have British service personnel and administrators in the tens of thousands, right? 100,000. So you cannot compare what is you'd call this Israel a garrison state. It's one of the most militarized countries on earth. They're amassing an army of 300,000 people. Michael, they only have a population of 10 million. 300,000. That is like this country having an army of like 2.5 million people. They have nuclear weapons, and they're dealing with a non-state actor, which is making missiles and projectiles. The missiles that are being sent towards Israel apparently cost around $600 to make. Meanwhile, Israel has the world's most sophisticated drone manufacturing industry. Israel is the world's number one sort of innovator in terms of manufacturing drones. So this idea that Palestine is analogous to the Third Reich and that Israel is analogous to the UK is so incredibly cretinous, Michael. I mean, in a way it's useful because you can just dismiss it and say, well, these people aren't serious. I'll finish with this as an ancillary point. Who are they trying to persuade with that kind of logic? They're clearly not trying to persuade anybody sensible, right? Well, what they are trying to do is go direct to the kinds of people who run this country, who only deal with historical analogies, who think everybody is Adolf Hitler Mark II, and are actually deeply ill-equipped to oversee foreign policy and geopolitics in the 21st century.